I was rinsing wine glasses at my mother-in-law's sink, the water running warm over my hands, when I heard her through the open kitchen door, talking to her sister in the dining room like I'd already left the house. At her age, there's no heir coming from that marriage, she said. I told Marcus years ago, some women just aren't built for it anymore. We may have to think about other arrangements. I set the glass down on the drying rack, carefully, so it wouldn't clink. I did not turn around. I did not walk in and demand she repeat herself to my face. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging by the sink, folded it back into its exact rectangle, and finished the dishes. 3 weeks later, a DNA test came back. Not the one anyone expected, and it didn't confirm anything about my age at all. My name is Dr. Naomi Ellison. I'm 41 years old, and for the last 16 years, I've worked as a clinical genetic counselor, the last 9 of them specializing in reproductive and prenatal genetics. My job is to sit across from families in some of the most vulnerable moments of their lives and explain, calmly and precisely, what their DNA is actually telling them, not what fear tells them, not what shame tells them, not what old family stories tell them, but what the science says, in black and white, no matter how inconvenient the truth turns out to be. I believed, going into my marriage, that a family's worth wasn't measured by bloodlines, or heirs, or who could produce the next generation on schedule. I believed love and honesty mattered more than lineage. That belief didn't survive contact with the Whitfield family. What replaced it wasn't bitterness, it was evidence. I met Marcus Whitfield when I was 32, at a conference dinner neither of us particularly wanted to attend. He was easy to talk to, uncomplicated in a way that felt like relief after years of demanding hospital schedules, and for a long time, that simplicity felt like a gift. What I didn't understand yet was that some of that simplicity came from never having had to push back against his own family, not once, not on anything that mattered. The Whitfields were old money dressed up as new humility. The kind of family that talked about keeping things down to earth, while quietly tracking, in painstaking detail, who married whom, whose children resembled which grandparent, and whose bloodline had thinned out over the generations. Vivienne, Marcus's mother, ran the family the way some people run a company, with a smiling public face and a private ledger she updated constantly. For the first 3 years, I told myself Vivienne's comments about children, about timing, about my age, were just old-fashioned concern dressed up badly. I gave up a fellowship position 2 states away, early in our marriage, so we could stay close to the family and, I told myself, start trying for kids without the added stress of relocation. I never told Marcus how much that fellowship would have meant to me. I filed it away, quietly, the way I filed away most things that year. Elise, Marcus's younger sister, was the one person in that family who made the dinners bearable. She was warm, self-deprecating, always the first to diffuse a tense moment with a joke at her own expense. She'd lost a pregnancy herself, 2 years before I married into the family, and she never talked about it directly, only in careful, sideways references that I respected enough not to push on. I trusted her more than anyone else in that house. I would learn, much later, that admiration and envy wear the same face, and Elise had been wearing both for longer than I ever suspected, though not, as it turned out, for the reasons I feared. After 4 years without a pregnancy, the comments from Vivienne sharpened from concern into verdict. She started saying things like, some women simply run out of time, directly to my face, at dinners, in front of Marcus, who would look uncomfortable and change the subject rather than defend me. I never told him how much that silence cost me. I told myself, marriages survive by choosing which battles are worth having, and I chose, again and again, not to have this one. So when I heard Vivienne in that dining room, talking about other arrangements, like I was a lease that had simply expired, I wasn't only hearing one comment. I was hearing 4 years of quiet verdicts finally reaching their conclusion. Let me take you back to that afternoon properly, because the first time I described it, I moved past it too quickly. Vivienne's voice had none of its usual performative warmth. It was flat, decisive, the voice she used with caterers and estate lawyers. I had Dr. Pruitt run a full panel, she was telling her sister, discreetly of course, through the family's account, not hers. I needed to know if this was fixable or if we needed to start having a real conversation with Marcus about his options. A full panel, run without my knowledge, without my consent, through a doctor I had seen exactly twice, both times as a courtesy visit, at Vivienne's insistence, both times believing it was a routine wellness check. I stood at that sink for maybe 2 minutes, drying a glass that was already dry. Then I did what I do for a living when someone hands me incomplete, frightening information. I decided I would not react to the story I was being told. I would react to the actual results, once I had them in front of me, in writing, with a proper chain of custody. I didn't confront Vivienne that day. I didn't confront Marcus that night, even though he came home and asked, entirely unaware, whether I'd had a nice afternoon at his mother's. I said it was fine. I made dinner. I said nothing. That night, once he was asleep, I opened my laptop and did the only thing that has ever reliably protected me in 16 years of this profession. I started building a file. My rule, and it's one I'd give to anyone standing where I stood, is simple. Gather everything before they know you've seen it. The moment someone realizes you're aware, they stop leaving a trail and start managing a story instead. The first thing I did was request my own medical records from every provider I'd seen in the past 5 years, which I was legally entitled to do, without anyone's permission but my own. Buried in a routine intake file from Dr. Pruitt's office, dated 8 months earlier, was a lab requisition I had never personally signed, submitted under my name, for an expanded reproductive genetic panel, far beyond a standard fertility workup. Someone had checked boxes on that form I would never have checked myself, ordering tests aimed less at whether I could conceive, and more at whether something in my genetic history could explain recurrent difficulty in the family line. That phrasing stopped me. Recurrent, not my difficulty, the family's. Over the following weeks, I did professionally what I have done for 16 years for strangers, except this time, the chart was my own life. I cross-referenced appointment dates against Vivienne's known schedule, requested billing records through the family account she'd used, which, because my name was attached to the claim, I had every legal right to see. I found 4 prior wellness visits over 3 years, all billed to the same account, all coded internally, not as general checkups, but as fertility consultations. Visits I remembered as unremarkable small talk with a doctor who barely looked up from his notes. Vivienne had been building a case against me for years, quietly, confidently, the same way a woman plans a dinner party, assuming no one would ever check the seating chart. People who believe they'll never get caught leave the messiest trails, because they've never once had to be careful. I nearly had the full picture: age, blame, a paper trail pointing entirely at me. Except one result in that file didn't fit the story Vivienne was building at all. Buried 3 pages into the expanded panel, past the fertility markers Vivienne clearly cared about, was a section flagged for hereditary thrombophilia and a related clotting factor mutation, a genetic marker strongly associated with recurrent, unexplained pregnancy loss. My results were unremarkable, completely, boringly normal for my age, but cross-referenced with a footnote from the lab, comparing my markers against a familial pattern Dr. Pruitt had apparently flagged in a prior, unrelated consult, a consult involving someone else in the Whitfield family entirely. It didn't make sense yet. If Vivienne's plan was simply to prove I was too old, why would her own doctor be quietly tracking a hereditary clotting condition running through the Whitfield bloodline itself? I sat with that inconsistency for almost 2 weeks before the answer found me, and it came from the person I least expected to bring it. Elise called me on a Sunday night, her voice already unsteady before she said anything real. She asked if she could come by. I said yes, mostly out of the professional habit of never turning away someone who sounds like they're finally ready to say something true. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd spread Vivienne's records weeks earlier, and told me, in pieces, what she'd been carrying since before I ever joined this family. Her pregnancy loss, 2 years before my wedding, hadn't been unexplained, the way the family always described it. Dr. Pruitt had identified the same hereditary clotting mutation in her blood work afterward, a mutation traceable through Marcus and Elise's father's side of the family, one that significantly raises the risk of recurrent miscarriage, and can, in some cases, be managed with early, targeted treatment once identified. Vivienne had known, for over 6 years. She had chosen not to tell either of her children, not to tell me, not to let it enter the family's story at all, because acknowledging a hereditary weakness in the Whitfield line, a family that had spent 3 generations quietly curating an image of robust, uncomplicated lineage for exactly the social circles that mattered to her, was a truth she found more unbearable than watching 2 women in her own family carry unexplained losses and unexplained blame instead. Rather than confront a fact about her own family's biology, Vivienne had spent years quietly redirecting the story onto the women who married in. Onto Elise's own body, briefly, before Elise stopped trying and stopped talking about it. And now, onto mine. Elise showed me a copy of her own old lab report, one she'd kept in a drawer for years without fully understanding what it meant, and a message from Dr. Pruitt, sent to Vivienne years earlier and forwarded to Elise by accident during a scheduling mix-up, that read plainly, "The mutation appears paternal line." Recommend genetic counseling for both children before future pregnancies are attempted. Please advise on next steps. There had never been a next step. Vivian had simply filed it away, the same way she filed away anything that didn't fit the family she wanted people to see. I sat at my own kitchen table holding a 6-year-old email that reframed everything, and I felt something loosen in me that had nothing to do with anger at first. For 4 years I had quietly absorbed the idea that my body, my age, my worth, had failed this family in some specific, personal way. That guilt dissolved completely in that kitchen. It had never been about me. It had been about a woman who would rather let 2 women she claimed to love carry unexplained blame than admit her own bloodline carried a flaw. I didn't move quickly after that. This wasn't only my story to expose, and Elise had trusted me with something that had cost her years of silence. But it changed, entirely, how I intended to finish this. The confrontation, when it came, happened at a christening for one of Vivian's other grandchildren, the kind of gathering she had spent a lifetime orchestrating down to the seating chart. I wasn't the one who brought it into the room. I heard about it afterward, in full, unfiltered detail, from Marcus's uncle Desmond, who called me the next morning, still audibly rattled. He said Vivian had just finished a toast about the strength of this family's line, when Elise, calm and steady, stood up at the far end of the table and asked her mother, in front of nearly 40 relatives, whether she was finally going to tell everyone why Dr. Pruitt had been quietly flagging the family's blood work for 6 years, or whether she was going to let the lab reports keep doing it for her. Desmond said the room didn't erupt. It went silent in a way he said he'd never heard at a Whitfield gathering before, the particular silence of 30 people, simultaneously recalculating everything they thought they knew. He said Vivian's expression didn't crack right away. It went rigid first, composed and frozen, right up until Elise set the 6-year-old email on the table, face up, and slid it toward her. He said Marcus, sitting 2 seats down, leaned over, read 4 lines over his mother's shoulder, and didn't say a single word for the rest of the dinner. He said Vivian left the room before dessert was served, for the first time in the family's recorded history. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. Some secrets only unravel fully in the rooms where the person they wronged isn't present to soften the blow. 2 days later, Marcus came to me. Not his mother, Marcus, sitting across from me at that same kitchen table, asking if we could talk. He apologized first for never questioning the wellness visits, which I believed, because by then, I'd confirmed through the billing records that he'd never once been listed as a party to any of them. But then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. He asked if there was a way to move past all of it. His mother, the years of blame, the quiet weight he now understood I'd been carrying alone, and start over, just the 2 of us. I told him I understood exactly why he wanted that. Understanding why someone allowed something, and being willing to keep living inside the consequences of it, are 2 entirely different decisions, and I'd already made mine before he finished asking. I told him that for 4 years I had quietly absorbed blame that was never mine to carry, in a marriage that never once stood between me and the person handing it to me. I told him some diagnoses. Once you finally have the real results in front of you, change more than just the treatment plan. They change what you're willing to keep living inside of. He asked for a second chance. I told him that forgiving someone for what they didn't know, and forgiving someone for 4 years of watching and saying nothing anyway, weren't the same request, and I was only prepared to grant the first one. The resolution wasn't loud either. There was no lawsuit against Vivian, no public reckoning beyond the one that had already happened at that dinner table without my involvement. Marcus and I separated within 2 months, and I handled the practical closure of our life together the way I handle every difficult case. Thoroughly, fairly, without theatre. I didn't need to extract anything from him. I only needed my name off a shared account, my own equipment out of the guest room I'd quietly turned into an office years earlier, and my own file, finally, closed on my own terms. Vivian reached out once, months later, with a message that read less like an apology and more like an attempt to have the record corrected in her favor. I answered it the way I close every consult that no longer requires my involvement. Briefly, clearly, without further follow-up. Some family relationships don't end with confrontation. They end with a folder set aside, like finishing the last page of a book you already knew the ending to, long before you reached it. 18 months passed. I left my position at the hospital system where I'd spent most of my career and opened an independent genetic counseling practice, one that focuses specifically on families navigating recurrent pregnancy loss and unexplained infertility, the exact quiet, unglamorous intersection of medicine and family blame, where I'd once needed someone in my corner and hadn't had one. I've since sat across the table from more women than I can count who arrived convinced their bodies had simply failed on schedule, only to learn, once the actual results were in front of them, that the real answer had been sitting in someone else's file the entire time. Elise and I are close now, closer than we ever were while I was still married into that family. Our relationship isn't what I once assumed it to be during those early years of careful dinner-table alliances. It's something steadier, built on the version of her that finally told the truth, even though it cost her the last comfortable illusion she had left about her own mother. Sometimes the greatest relief isn't discovering you were right all along. It's discovering the blame was never yours to carry in the first place, and finally setting it down for good. So tell me, if you'd been standing at that christening table when Elise slid that email across to her mother, would you have said anything, or let the silence finish the job? Let me know in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. If you want more stories about women who stayed composed until exactly the right moment, and then didn't stay quiet at all, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.